fraudulent disbursements. So with fraudulent disbursements, you are kind of paying yourself money. Right? You're in a position to write yourself a check. You're spending company money on yourself. That's the idea here. This is a pretty meaty little section. It's 82 pages long. There's a lot in here. There's a lot of different schemes. This one, I feel like a lot of test questions could come from this section. Okay, so we're talking check tampering, we're talking payroll schemes, we're talking electronic payment tampering, billing and purchasing. There's all kinds of stuff in here. So let's see what we got. Oh, well, we already kind of talked about that. So register disbursements, cash registers. How could we pay ourselves from the cash register? So that's kind of where they start. You could have a false refund. You could refund somebody something and give yourself that money, right? So that would indicate that the inventory is going back, but it's not. So now you got the whole shrinkage problem that you had with the skimming, right? So there could be a fictitious refund. There could be an actual refund where you just overstated the amount and pocketed the difference. There's all kinds of things you can do. They do make the point that hitting it in little small chunks instead of bigger chunks would be a good way to avoid being detected. The questions you would get from this would often be something about inventory, kind of like with the whole inventory shrinkage thing. I can't think of a way they might word it, but it would be something like basically you get at, I can't figure a way to put this into words, but I feel like your test question would be, if you're processing a fake refund, it's going to fall out in inventory somehow. I feel like that's how your questions would be worded probably. Red flag would be problems with inventory and things like that. Your inventory on the balance sheet would be overstated, right, compared to what's in the storeroom. That might be a way this test question gets at this. All right, check tampering. There's a lot of stuff that can be asked here because you've got all these different types of schemes. You've got forged maker, forged endorsement, altered payee, authorized maker. Those are all different types of check tampering. They're easy to keep straight though. Forged maker, the maker is the person who signs the check. The endorser, who writes the check and signs their name on it, right? The endorser is the one who signs their name and cashes it, right? So you do kind of have to keep that straight. So, but that's easy, the maker, they made the check, wrote the check, signed my name, here you go, right? And then whoever endorses it signs their name, give me my money, right? So a forged maker would be forging the person who signs the check, right? Somebody grabs the check that says Corey Cagle at the top, writes $1,000 to themselves and signs my name on there. They have forged the maker, right? They have acted like they're me, wrote one of my checks to themselves, right? And then they endorse it, but they're not forging the endorsement. They endorse it, it's written to them, right? They forged my name. Forged endorsement would be getting a check that was written to somebody else, writing their name on the endorsement line and cashing it as if they are them, right? So that's the difference. Altered payees getting a check and crossing out somebody's name, writing their own name in it to be payable to them, right? Authorized maker would be, all right, so let's say I can sign a check that has U and A at the top, I am authorized to do that. Now, I'm not authorized to spend UNA money on anything, but I am authorized to sign my name on it. So if I take a UNA check, sign my actual name on it, which I'm allowed to do, but pay myself fraudulent funds, that is an authorized maker scheme. I'm using something I'm authorized to do, and I'm doing something wrong. So that's the difference in all those. And you will definitely get test questions on those, usually an example and saying what kind of scheme is this. So you just kind of have to read it carefully and figure out where the fraud takes place and put a name on it. It's fairly easy. Okay. Yeah, that's about it. The book makes a point that usually the people who try to do these kind of frauds are the ones who are have the duty to do the bank reconciliation. So it's good to separate that duty. Anybody who's handling checks should not reconcile the bank statement, right? And you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, at the number of people who don't even reconcile the bank accounts at all. So that's a thing that often doesn't happen. All right. This is a section that's easy to kind of blow through and say, what in the world could they ask about this? And that's exactly what I did on my first run through. I'm like, oh, that's what are they going to ask? They have questions on this, and it usually has to do with this positive pay thing for some reason. I don't know why they like to ask that question, but they do. So electronic payment tampering. So this is just, you don't have a physical check. It's just automatic from the bank. ACH, what does that stand for? I looked it up. Automated Clearinghouse. Yeah, that's what it stands for. So one point that's worth taking note of, tampering with electronic payments is harder to detect than tampering with physical checks for obvious reasons, right? I think you would know that if you got that test question. But what they like to ask here is how to prevent, and it usually has to do with these security things that banks offer. Positive pay is a go-to for the test questions, and it's just a little system that the bank has set up where they verify checks against this list of approvals that you've given them before they'll take the money out. And then more broadly, there's little filters you can put on there, or you can even block ACH transactions altogether. Um, so, and also they recommend that if you do have automated activity, that you have a separate account for it versus the ones you write paper checks for, because it keeps things in better control and the audit process is a little easier that way. I can't imagine that many people do that, but they recommend it. So yeah, make note of that. That seems like something that you wouldn't commit to memory or worry about getting tested on, but it's kind of one of their hot spots. All right, billing schemes. All right, so these are kind of interesting to read about with the examples and things, but you are setting up invoices, fake invoices to make it work to where you're able to pay yourself for fake things, right? So you can have a fake invoice through a shell company, a fake company set up. You can have a co-conspirator that you can set up an invoice from, or something as easy as just buying stuff for yourself with company funds, right? Did I put? Yeah, okay, we got shell companies. That's kind of a hot spot for test questions. So shell companies are not real. It's really usually nothing more than a mailing address. There's no employees. It doesn't do anything to generate any value. It has a bank account and a post office box, probably about it. But it can be used to, there's legitimate reasons to use these types of companies, but a lot of times they're used for the wrong kind of reasons. There's a really, I don't want to say neat because it's very wrong what they did, but one of the examples in the book some of these you read and you're like, well, that's pretty clever. And then you feel bad. Do what? Yeah, well, you're going to like this one. Let's see, it's on page. All right. So in this example, it said that there was a guy who was in charge of buying computer equipment. And he was an expert. And he had high standing in the company. And he was not being supervised in this task because probably nobody else knew anything about it anyway. So he has this knowledge that nobody else does. So he's like, well, He set up a shell company, used it to buy computers, and then he used his company and had his company buy the computers from his shell company at these gigantic prices. So he just made this big, huge profit on this. It said he got about $1 million from the company over time doing this. So there you go. $1 million is not that much. I'm gonna have to disagree with you on that one.
If I had $1 million, I would not be complaining.
You risking everything right there. So if I work here and then I know how to risk everything, I can be I've got anything for my Just enough to get out of it. Yeah. Right. One thing, for the risk that
What is enough for you to do it? I'm just kidding. You didn't think about it. Oh man. Yeah, but I thought that was pretty clever. I hate to say that, but kind of was. Okay, so put a shell company, and you can just go to work using that shell company to defraud somebody. You can have a shell company. You are the shell company, right? So your shell company can provide services to your actual company you're working for. You can have your shell company bill the company for those services that never happened, and you get the money, right? So the employee has to be the one who's able to approve these payments. It says negligent supervisors are often targeted to approve them if they're not. So it's like, hey, sign this. All right, that y'all know how that goes sometimes. Or you might be have a kind of a collusion thing going with one of the supervisors. Like, hey, let's get this going. You approve it, I'll pay it. We'll split it. That kind of thing. That's where it gets really hard to detect when people are in it together. But a term you need to know is this pass-through scheme, where things are sold as they pass through a shell company, essentially, usually at an inflated price. Pay and return scheme, that was one of our little example questions from the website last week or 2 weeks ago. They gave just an example and said, this is an example of what type of scheme. Was pretty descriptive of what was going on, but you double pay an invoice, call them and say, hey, send that check back. We paid you twice, and they do, and you take it and pocket it. Pay, return, that's what it's called. Or a variation on that is just, instead of double paying, just send money to some vendor and say, hey, we paid you by mistake, send it back. Okay, pocket it. It's in the records already, it's approved. It's kind of clever too. Or overpay the vendor and say, oh, send us back the difference, and then you pocket that. So you can kind of see how that would be an easier one to pull off, because it seems very legitimate. You're paying this guy, you always pay, right? So pay and return. All right. Shifting gears to payroll fraud. They love talking about ghost employees. Yeah, so ghost employee. So a ghost employee is somebody that you have inserted into the payroll system that shouldn't be there. All right. Don't let them trick you by thinking that a ghost employee has to be a person that's not an existing person. The ghost employee could be my brother, right? Or it could be somebody I know that does exist, or it could just be,
Just that they don't work there.
Right. Or it could be a fake person. It could be somebody with a very similar name to somebody in the company. Or, you know, maybe somebody who used to work there, they got fired, but you didn't take them out of the system, and you're using that person to pay yourself. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. So that's one way. Or a little simpler, you know, falsifying time cards and just overstating your time. It's real easy, right? Or altering your salary number in the payroll records, or your wage rate in the payroll records. That kind of thing. Things that aren't as clever, but effective, I'm sure. You know, real simple type things. All right. The questions that would come from this are pretty obvious, but as I said, they really like those ghost employee questions, it seems. Let's see. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about it, really. All right, and moving on to our last little thing, expense reimbursements. So if you are traveling on company time and you incur expenses and you get reimbursed for them, all right, ways to get, you know, fraudulent expense reimbursements. So there's a lot of ways to do this. You know, take a bunch of buddies out for dinner and expense it. You know, that's a simple way. Like, hey, that was a business dinner, but it wasn't, right? Something as simple as that. Any kind of personal thing, you know, take your wife with you and expense her plane ticket, even though she has no business purpose, right? Get a receipt and alter it. It'd be a simple one. And then they get a little more clever. It says, over-purchase stuff, return it for a refund, repurchase the correct amount, but turn in the receipt for the big amount. Okay? Something like that. Do what? You like that one? That's clever, right? So it's like, yeah, I mean, that'd be a tough one to catch. Like, you know, you submit, you know, especially if you're using your personal credit card and getting reimbursed, because you would show them your credit card statement probably and the receipt. So you've got, especially if they're on separate statements, and it's like, here's the receipt for this big purchase that was wrong. Here's where it hit my credit card statement. Meanwhile, on the next credit card statement, that one's voided off with the correct amount. Pretty clever, right? And then submit for the same expense several times with several types of support for the same one. Usually the test questions would be some example, and you know, they'll say this is a type of what scheme, and the answer would be fictitious expense reimbursement or something like that. There are, I probably should have put them in the slide, but there are terms for some of these things, like overstated expenses, fictitious expenses, multiple reimbursements. The terms are descriptive of what it is, so I guess that's why I didn't put it in there. I think they call this a mischaracterization of an expense, or mischaracterized. So that would be worth taking note of. Personal expense, you mischaracterized it as a business expense. Okay, so there's your different types of, what was this called? Disbursement fraud. So again, pretty logical stuff as far as test questions go, I feel like. Any questions or comments on that? This is a shorter section here. It's we're still stealing assets here. Now we're stealing inventory and other assets, but really they focus on inventory. That's the main focus of this one. So you can steal by misusing, right? You can get a company vehicle and use it, and that's fraud, right? You're using up something that's not yours. You can steal company supplies. You can use the computer to print off your own stuff. Nobody's ever done that, have they? Yeah. Any office equipment, you can go make copies of your own stuff on their copy machine. You know, that's all misusing company assets. You can use company equipment to do personal work on company time, right? You may work for a lawn landscaping company or something. You might take some of that equipment to your house and do a little landscaping. Oh, was it on the review thing?
Yeah, it was something about you work for a lawn company and you mow somebody's yard on your street and you take it to your house and mow your yard.
There you go. So yeah, it wouldn't even have to be on company time to, using company equipment would be enough, but using it on company time would be like double bad, right? Not only are you misusing their stuff, you're getting paid for it. And then using it for your own little side business, that'd be a bad deal. All right, or you can just steal the stuff. Here we are, larceny again. This is not just cash, you can steal inventory. And here's some the kind of similar type things. It's what we've already talked about, right? Except now we're stealing the actual inventory instead of the cash. So a false sale. This one kind of cracks me up because you have an accomplice who comes in and you're just doing a whole dramatic acting job where they're like, okay, here you go. Like, oh, let me ring this up. And then you hand them the inventory and they pretend to hand you money or whatever. And nothing of this really is happening. You're just giving them an easy way to take inventory out of the store where they didn't actually pay for it. That seems an easy thing to get away with, right? So if you're an owner of a retail company, you might have to watch that kind of thing because on the surface it looks to be a normal thing. Let's see, purchasing and receiving scheme. So you buy assets just for the purpose of taking it, right? It's like I'm putting in a little requisition for this, or purchase order for this, and it's going to be mine. You can falsify records of a shipment, change it to 900 units, keep the other 100, send accounts payable an invoice that says 1,000, they'll pay it, keep the 900 unit one in inventory or in the receiving room or whatever, and everything appears fine, right? You could reject some of the shipment as no good and just keep it instead of returning it. It's like, I'm sending this back and then sending it to yourself, right? And then here's a more comprehensive discussion on inventory shrinkage, which is a favorite little test item because it shows up in several little areas. But the official definition of inventory shrinkage is it's a reduction of company inventory, a real reduction of inventory. The inventory is gone, but it's not accounted for in the records. So if somebody steals inventory, that causes inventory shrinkage. Or there might be errors, things like that. Inventory shrinkage that's going on, that's a red flag for fraud, of course. The methods to conceal it's kind of interesting. Physical padding, sticking empty boxes in there that makes it look like something's in there. And I've seen some interesting stories on ways to hide inventories that's been stolen. Filling boxes with bricks. There was one, I can't remember this whole story. Never mind. There was a funny story in there, and I can't remember it. It would take me forever to find it. I think there was one where there was a company with multiple locations, and overnight they had a bunch of trucks taking inventory from the place that was just observed to the one they were going to observe the next day. Yeah, that's what it was. I think that was in this book. I may have read it somewhere else. That's kind of funny. Other ways to conceal inventory shrinkage: change the records, of course, or write it off as obsolete or as scrap or something like that. How to detect: analytical procedures. And this is something that we hit pretty quick in that fraud analytics course. If sales and cost of goods sold aren't moving together, that's an immediate red flag, unless there's some little way to reason through it, right? There may be a reason that cost of goods sold didn't quite move in parallel with it. But, if sales goes up 20% and cost of goods sold goes up way more than that, that's a big red flag right there. So that's one of the quick analytical procedures we do in that fraud class. And that's an immediate red flag if it doesn't. And also a good test question in the CFE exam, sales and cost of goods sold should move together. They'll probably ask that one way or another. They may give you actual numbers, or they may just say, which of the following is a red flag? That would be an answer choice or something like that. So that wraps this up. So what type of test questions from this? Pretty easy ones. Probably a lot on inventory shrinkage and how people try to cover it up and what inventory shrinkage is, and that kind of thing. Probably definition type things on these schemes, purchasing and receiving, and false sale. A little example. This is a type of what scheme? It's a false sale, right? I don't really know what else they could really do here that would be unanswerable without, some of this stuff you don't have to study for at all. You just automatically would know it. This is a pretty quick, easy section. Any comments on it? Bribery and corruption is next. This is just a series of definitions you kind of need to know, the different types of things: bribery, kickbacks, illegal gratuities, economic extortion, collusion. The questions you get from this are going to be, this is an example of what, or this is the definition of what. These are real easy. Usually it's, this is an example of what. So let's go through here. So corruption in general, and you might even get a definition question on it. Corruption is some way of using your influence to get an unfair advantage, to benefit yourself to the detriment of somebody else, right? Helping yourself, screwing somebody else over in the process, right? Unfair advantage, that's corruption. And types are listed here that we'll kind of look at individually. We're probably pretty familiar with what bribery is. So it is a business transaction in and of itself. You are buying influence. So you're giving something or offering something or receiving something to influence some kind of act, some kind of decision. I'll do this if you'll do this, right? I'll give you this if you'll help me out with this. I'll give you this preferential treatment if you'll buy from me, something like that. There's collusion involved. There's two people involved here. There are a couple of, kind of drop into more specific types of bribery. There's official bribery, where you're bribing an official of the government. Or there's commercial bribery, where you're bribing a private person in a commercial or business setting. So just definitions there, and you might see an example. So-and-so said they do this if you do this. This is what? Bribery. Right? Kickbacks. It's a form of bribery. You're negotiating here. So here you're paying a commission in exchange for preferential treatment. So, hey, person who's selling stuff, I'll make sure this company buys everything from you if you'll cut me in on it and give me a little piece of the action. That's a kickback, right? It's like, I want, if you'll make sure I have this business, I'll kick some of the profits your way. But the big problem that comes along with that, besides the fact that you are treating other competitors unfairly, is that vendor's got an exclusive arrangement. They're going to start overbilling rather. So it's going to hurt everybody except the two involved, right? So that's what a kickback is. Other examples other than that, you might have an inspector coming in and you pay them to accept substandard materials or something like that. There's different variations, but it's usually like, hey, I'll give you this if you'll, whatever. Illegal gratuity. Key word here is it's kind of like a bribery, except a bribe kind of happens before the act happens. Illegal gratuity happens afterward. So it's, bribery is, I'll do this if you'll do this. And illegal gratuity is, since you did this for me, I'm giving you this, right? So it's an item of value to reward something after it's happened. So that's really the big difference there. So any question where the answer is illegal gratuity is going to make sure and say that after this happened, they gave you this. That's the key, right? Economic extortion is where you're being mean to folks, saying, hey, if you don't do this, I'm going to hurt you somehow, not necessarily physically. It'd be like, I'm going to stop doing this, or I'm going to make sure that I'm going to threaten you that I'm not going to do this anymore, or something like that, right? So kind of using fear or threats with economic extortion. So all of those definitions are good test questions, very good test questions, very easy ones, really. And then they just kind of go off into some more broad areas here. Off-book schemes, is kind of what these are, right? They're most easily identified at the point of, this is kind of trickier stuff, where do we identify these types of things? Usually at the point where the funds are deposited, where they're spent. It's hard to uncover these types of things. Usually it comes into play, and I may have this in here somewhere, because of some kind of tip that you get from somebody. It's like, hey, I think something's going on with these guys. I have knowledge of this. That's usually how these types of things are uncovered. But you can identify it where the funds, are being spent. On-book schemes, usually better identified where the funds are stolen. So they kind of throw that in there. I don't know that I spend a whole lot of time worrying about that, but I thought it's kind of worth noting on the slide. Not sure where the test questions would come from that, other than just maybe the basic, off-book schemes are most easily identified where A, B, C, D. And then they get into, ways to kind of see that this type of thing might go on, right? Behavioral things, so like red flags about the way people are acting. That guy always has a wad of cash in his pocket. Where's that coming from? Why does this person have an Armani suit that costs $5,000? They don't make that much money. Examples that I've heard in fraud presentations people have done, for some reason, they're like, hey, that lady has a Coach purse. Is that it? Is that an expensive thing? Is it Coach? Am I right? Y'all don't know.
Yeah,
Not,
they're coming back.
they're coming back.
Maybe
It's an old example then. Something like that. It's like they shouldn't have that, right?
You can get a coach for $100.
Okay. So that was an old example then. A Birkin. If they've got a Birkin, whatever.
Or
what
they've
is
been
it?
to Chinatown.
They've got all these country club memberships or something like that, or they have an addiction problem. They have a gambling habit. They've got all these debts. They've got extraordinary medical expenses. So we kind of go from, kind of the, different ways they might spend that money. And, with some of these last ones, it's like they may be stealing to keep that going. Whereas the others, like, well, here's the rewards that I'm getting here. And then finally, conflicts of interest. This is good testing area too. Y'all probably know that from audit class and things like that. People like to ask these questions. I'd say the main point with conflicts of interest, the key is, for there to be a problem, the key is it can't get my words right. It's undisclosed, all right? A conflict of interest, if it's disclosed, then it's not as big of a problem, right? So if you've got some kind of conflict of interest and you say, hey, I'm dealing with my brother on this, and the employer says that's fine, there's no conflict of interest anymore. It's if you're dealing with your brother and you never tell him, then you've got a conflict of interest, right? So the key is it's not disclosed. All right, so what is it? You all know what it is, but you got an employee has some kind of undisclosed personal interest in some kind of matter that could influence the role that they play in the company, right? There's often some kind of self-dealing going on, or dealing with a family member. A conflict of interest could be accepting inappropriate gifts or favors or even kickbacks and things like that. Self-dealing, that's conflict of interest. And I threw a little difference in there with conflict of interest and bribery. So bribery would be an example where an employee approves a fraudulent invoice submitted by a vendor in return for a kickback. That'd be a form of bribery. Conflict of interest would be employee approves payment on an invoice submitted by his own company and it's undisclosed. So somewhat subtle difference, but not really. So with conflict of interest, we're getting a little into law here. This will show up later. Actually, stop typing on that second bullet point for some reason. You're breaching your fiduciary duty to your employer. You have a duty of loyalty to them, and I started typing once upon a time. Duty of care was where I was going with that other one, I think. But maybe, I don't know why I put a parenthesis around it. I don't know why I did that or when I did that, honestly, but I'll just erase it and pretend like it didn't happen. Gone. All right. So a duty of loyalty that you have, the employee is required to act solely in the best interest of the employer, not in his or her own self-interest. So no self-dealing, no conflicts of interest, no kind of abuse for personal advantage. That is a duty, a legal duty that you have. That'll show up in law a little better. Conflict of interest is not a legal violation if it's properly disclosed. So we talked about that earlier, and that's kind of the key to test questions, really, with conflict of interest. Other than, here's an example of something, what is this? And the answer is conflict of interest. And then they make this point, they say shell company transactions are not conflicts of interest because the fraudster has no interest in the shell company that would cause a division of loyalty. It's simply a fraudulent disbursement. I don't know how important that is. It's getting a little nitpicky, but I guess it is, because often these test questions are, here's all this example of things that happen. This is an example of what. So if it's a shell company, there's no conflict of interest there, right? That could be important. Other schemes, just little definitional type things that may or may not show up. Turnaround sales or flips. An employee knows that the employer is looking to buy something, so the employee buys it himself in the name of an accomplice or in the name of a shell company and then sells to the employer at an inflated price. That's exactly what that $1 million person was doing, right? Except they were doing it on an ongoing basis. Underselling, you cause your company to undersell to your own company that you have an interest in. So you're kind of making transactions work out to the company's detriment, but in your favor. Writing off sales, decrease or write off an amount owed by your company to the employee, to your employer, right? It's like, hey, my company that he doesn't know about owes him money, but I have the power to just remove that, so I'm going to, so I no longer owe him anymore, right? Or start up a business that competes directly with your employer and siphon off clients to your own business. That would be a bad deal as well. So, all right. So that's bribery and corruption. Very much definitions and examples in that one. That's an easy one to study for. All right, last one. This one's kind of interesting. This one was long. It's like 56 pages. There's a lot of stuff here, but there's not a whole lot to really take note of, I guess. I feel like a lot of the questions, if there were any questions from this, beyond what I've kind of taken note of here, would be so obvious that there's no reason to ever study for it anyway, or even read any of this in the first place. So I only ended up with 4 slides worth of information on this. Competitive intelligence versus espionage. So we've kind of shifted into a new segment of the chapter, or of the section here, away from these types of schemes and things. Now we're talking about people trying to steal data from you, or trying to steal ideas from you, trying to spy on you and see what you're up to and get in ahead of you after gathering that information. So there's competitive intelligence, where you are kind of legally finding things out about your competitor, versus espionage, where you're illegally stealing information, right? So competitive intelligence is okay. Take data that you can gather legally and use it. It's out there. There's no reason why you shouldn't. Espionage, though, now you're being sneaky. So they immediately mention what's called open source information. This is stuff that's out there. All right. Anybody can get this. This is not what you're going to be fraudulently obtaining. All right. Open source information is just there for the taking. You may have to pay for the information from some database or something, but you don't have to go into all this crazy stuff that we're about to talk about for open source information. All right. We're looking for stuff that's not open source. How are we going to do it? A lot of definitions here that are kind of funny. Scavenging. We are finding information left lying around. All right. So now, how could we get in there in the first place? And the chapter goes into all these funny things. You obtain an ID that says you're an employee, and you just get in there and roam around. Or longer term, you become an employee of that company for the sole purpose of spying, right? Or you kind of wander around like you're a utility guy or something like that. Movie type stuff they're talking about. Stuff you see on usually comedies, but anyway, scavenging is just looking around for stuff that you can use, right? If y'all are trying to scavenge at UNA, y'all could bust in my office and look for intermediate tests or something like that, or lying around in my office. There's tons of them in there, so y'all could probably do some scavenging there. Or you could go dumpster diving for old tests that I threw away. All right, that's exactly what it is, dumpster diving. You're looking for stuff in the trash. It's not worth it.
I've never studied.
Yeah. So you can go looking for intermediate tests from a year or two ago that I've thrown away. Usually we shred those, though, so you're not going to find them. Sorry, you'll have to go scavenging in my office to find them. The old ones are shredded. But that's what dumpster diving is, looking around in the trash. Surveillance. Y'all know what surveillance is. You're spying on folks, and they go into specific types where you are following people. You're mobile. You are in a fixed position looking at it from a distance, or you have technical surveillance where you're tapped into audio or visual or things like that. So all this is good testable stuff. Usually examples where they say this is example of what. So, so-and-so put on a baker uniform and went into the kitchen and started looking for secret recipes, and this is an example of what? Scavenging, right? So that's the type of test questions, believe it or not, that you would see on this. All right, more. Insider spy or a mole, employee recruited to spy against the employer. So there's somebody already working in that company, and you kind of turn them as your own spy. A sleeper. It's all movie type stuff, right? A spy that you have planted in another company to spy. All right, so you might get test questions on this goofy stuff. Kind of funny. Social engineering. I think we're all very familiar with that one these days. So test questions for sure on this, I bet. Social engineering, you're tricking folks. All right, that's kind of the key here. You're trying to trick them, you're trying to persuade them into giving you information that they wouldn't otherwise give. And they go into all the little different variations on social engineering, most of which we're probably familiar with. Pretexting, you're impersonating someone. Shoulder surfing, you are literally watching over their shoulder or listening, trying to get their password or something like that. Phishing, we don't have to define that one. But they do later in the different sections go into specific types of phishing. There's spear phishing, and spear phishing is just a more direct attack. There's another type of phishing where it's more of a wider cast net. I forget the name of that one. There's farming, farm. Yeah, we get into all that later. I can't remember all of it off the top of my head. Reverse social engineering, where you make somebody think they're helping, but they're actually doing you wrong and things like that. So we're kind of scratching the surface on social engineering here. It gets dealt with a lot more heavily later on in different sections. And these three things, especially the top two, would be good, in my opinion, testable things. Non-disclosure agreements, where you make the employee agree not to disclose private information now or after they leave, right? So it's, don't disclose it while you're working, don't disclose it after you leave. Don't, right? Non-competition, once you're gone, you can't work for competing companies for a specified period of time. Those would be good testable areas for sure. Data minimization might show up. I put it on there mainly because you see that word and you're not really sure what it means if you haven't seen it before. So data minimization is kind of trying to protect your data from being stolen. You only keep the stuff you really need, the minimal amount you need. Destroy the rest, right? And that's just kind of a little extra security. If it's not available, it can't be stolen. So destroy it. All right. So long little chapter, but we can narrow it down to those definitions that we kind of covered. And beyond that, really obvious questions probably that aren't worth taking note of. So I think that's probably good. Any questions or comments on any of these? All right. So, we're probably halfway done with this section of the CFE exam.